Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Exercise Mechanic. Today we have a slightly different format for today's episode. We are going to be doing the 12 days of LiftMas, 12 myths that are hurting your personal training business. I am joined by Ryan Taylor and Brett Patterson. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Ho, ho, ho.
I'm good.
Okay.
That's all we get from Ryan this week?
Yeah, man. Playing it cool this week.
So I know that you guys, we've all come to the table with 4 different myths that we've found hurt people's businesses or perhaps have hurt our own. And so what I'd like to do is maybe what we could do is we could go one each. And then we'll essentially go around. We'll do, 12 rounds. 12 rounds, just kind of going around, whatever. It's bad at math. 4 rounds.
Yikes.
4 rounds. 4 rounds, 3 people, total of 12. It's the end of the day here. Who wants to go first, Ryan or Brett?
I had that one
it's
that
Brett's
Ryan
idea,
liked.
so let him start.
It was my idea? I didn't
Yes.
think so. All right.
Yeah, let's go for it. What do you got?
I'll start with that tasty one that Ryan seemed to like was that having cheap rates doesn't necessarily mean more clients, and certainly not more better clients. So I've encountered this with a few different trainers. I remember meeting one. I had heard her name around, and we had a few mutual connections, and ended up chatting with her and found out she was working like 40 training hours a week. And I was like, dang, that's a busy schedule. She must be making bank. And then chatted with one of our mutual connections and found out she was charging like $50 a session or something like that in like post-COVID money for in-person sessions, which is, half price for me. Like that's very cheap. And I was like, well, crap, no wonder she's working 40 hours a week. So she did have more clients, but like, I'd much rather work 20 hours than charge $100.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We had a guest on here yesterday, Paul O'Need. So I don't know which episode is going to drop first, but he had said something. Honestly, that was a really big takeaway. It was really concise, but I liked it a lot, which is don't do something that won't work for 50 people. Don't do it for 5. So for example, if you charge low rates, if you're charging, let's say if an online coach, you're charging $50 a month, for example, 50 clients still doesn't pay your bills. So people will like charge these low rates to attract clients. But the problem is the scalability of that for an actual income just isn't there. And you end up having to compensate because at the end of the day, we all have bills to pay. Whether you're doing this in some cases as like a side hustle or it's your full-time gig, you got rent or mortgage or car payment, you have to make a certain income. And you're either going to do that with having higher rates potentially, or if you have low rates, you have to work just a cajillion hours. I have a whole bunch of clients. And at some point that's just not it's just not practical. And then the second point, around this particular myth, I guess, is also what you charge also dictates the perceived value that clients have.
That's huge.
We
sure.
do this with every product that's out there. It's just kind of consumer psychology. When something's more expensive, I just assume it's better. And if you're really, really cheap, my gut reaction is like, they're probably not very good. Mm-hmm. Whether that's true or not, but I think that you shoot yourself in the foot for how people perceive you.
It goes both ways too, because if you charge very little, that can also affect how you see yourself. And in many ways, it also flows outwards from poor self-esteem. Whereas if you dare to charge more, you also tend to hold yourself to a higher service standard as well. And the ripple effects, it might work in the short term to get more clients initially, but it usually ends up creating a situation where it's like a little bit golden handcuffs, like you were saying, where you're working so many hours and you're burnt out. And cool, like maybe you're scraping by, but now you're just like, you're rushing to get through all of the deliverables, et cetera, just so you can kind of sort of scrape by, and you're not actually making a great living, let alone living a good life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree, man. I think that, like, generally speaking, lowering your rates for the sake of volume, unless you have the systems to tolerate volume at scale, usually isn't the way to go in the personal training industry. I would agree.
On a macro level too, once you pull it away, it gives people a false sense of what personal training is. And, if people see, and, the people with low rates are probably going to be the ones who are advertising those rates the most and not just saying, hey, contact me for details. People get an idea that like, oh, personal training doesn't cost that much. And then they walk in and see you and they're like, hey, what the hell? That's 3 times more than I was expecting to pay. And it just sets poor expectations for the industry as a whole, which is, kind of insulting to us who have been working hard and to achieve these rates and stuff like that. One thing to your point, Etienne, about like self-esteem is, I mentioned to some of the staff that I manage, like, think about how much you would pay for training for a trainer. And it probably isn't that much because you take for granted all of this education and experience that you've got. And you're like, well, I've got this and I know this. But sure, to somebody who's walking in who doesn't have that experience and they're walking in off the street and maybe have never stepped foot in the gym, like all that knowledge is hugely valuable to them. And so you have to kind of put yourself in your client's shoes and say like, oh, well, what would somebody else pay to potentially change their lives?
Yeah.
100%.
Agreed.
100%. Go for it, Ryan.
I'll do, myth number 2, which is teaching information to your client won't make them leave you. If anything, it'll empower them and create more value in your coaching. I think a lot of trainers and coaches, especially when they're newer in their career, I think most people figure this out at some point, operate from almost like a scarcity bias, where it's like, if I teach them too much, then they won't have any need for me. And I think the opposite is the reality of that.
Yeah, I agree. I had a conversation recently with one of the trainers that I do mentorship with, where he was speaking with one of his associates at his gym, someone who's higher up than him, about the marketing strategy that he's been using to get clients, which has been very successful. And the feedback that he got from management was, don't do that. You're giving away all of your best stuff for free. No one will need you. And he's like, well, evidently that's not the case because I've like doubled my roster over the course of a matter of months. And I was really validated today because in the internship, we had a speaker come on called Mickey Anderson, who's just a marketing wizard. And she was talking about like 3 major kind of, how would I say, moments in the sales process. So it was like pre-sale, there's like intra, and then there's post, essentially. And when it comes to the pre-sale process, you're looking to give away, like it's like 90%, like just give value. And then the offer is a 10% soft offer, so to speak. And I felt very validated in that moment because like she's talking about just like give away your best shit for free. And then generally speaking, if people are having trouble with implementation, which is normally where it falls apart for people, isn't necessarily knowledge, but it's like, how does the rubber meet the road and how do I apply this to my life? When people see that you have a lot to offer, they are then going to come to you for the implementation, generally speaking. So I agree with you, Ryan, man. I think that like always give away your best stuff for free. Best case scenario, you have people who trust you, who believe in you, who want to work with you. Worst case scenario, you help people.
Yeah.
I love nothing more than having a client who reaches a point where they feel confident enough to write their own programs, go to the gym themselves, and like do their own thing without checking in with me. And they're at that point, I'm like, hey, you don't need me anymore. And it's a great feeling to kind of like set someone free. And I've had clients who have gone on to like get their own certifications and, coach other people or get into like sports and have the confidence to start teaching others. And suddenly you're like, your reach is like expanding. Nothing I love more than being like a coach great grandparent.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. All right. Anything you guys want to add on to Ryan's second one? No, that was really good. Love it. All right. On my end, myth number 3, why being attached to the outcome is hurting your sales. So what I mean by that is clingy salespeople, clingy, needy salespeople that are selling and just thinking about themselves. That process just repels potential buyers. The moment, because like people aren't stupid, right? Like they can smell from a mile away when you actually don't give a shit about them and you just want their wallet. And so there's something that I got from my business coach, Mickey, who I mentioned earlier, that she calls with or without you energy, which I love because I find it really summarizes it really well. It's like, I actually don't like, I would love to work with you, and I'm completely detached from the outcome. You need to make the decision that's right for you. I'm going to present the information. I'm going to advocate for your health. I'm going to tell you why I think this is good for you. But ultimately, I will not cling. I refuse to cling. I refuse to chase. And that creates, at least in my experience, trust with the buyer. And also, I think there's something kind of sexy about that from the buyer's perspective, where they're like, oh, like this person like doesn't feel like they need me. Like they must be excellent, you know? And I think it can perhaps interrupt some of the patterns of the sales experiences that a lot of people have had over the years. And the fact that it's refreshing and a little bit of a pattern interrupt, I think can actually attract buyers, at least in my experience. What do you guys think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it influences the interaction on both ends. So I think when you operate from a place of needing their business, your actions change. And potentially you're acting from a place that lacks integrity. You know, I think that's when you start to see, you know, quote unquote, like sleazy sales practices, so on and so forth. And much to your point, I often look at sales as being very analogous to like dating. And, you know, think about it. Like if you are a guy who's like trying to pick up women and you act like desperate, like they need to come home with you, they need to, like that is just like
I need to take notes. Wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. That is like the cologne that repels every single female that's like in your vicinity. Whereas if you act from a place where it's like, hey, like, you know, I'd love your company, I'd like to get to know you, I'm totally cool either way. I think that level of confidence, which is really what it boils down to, just attracts people. And I think on just like a really animalistic level, the same type of attraction that draws people in like a romantic or a dating sense is the same type of thing that draws people in like a sales sense as well.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. I've seen kind of like on both ends of the outcome spectrum. Like I've seen the people who are aggressive salespeople who like somebody walks in there like, I'm going to sell them the biggest package I can. And then the people on the opposite end who hate sales and just want to get it over with. And they're like, I'm going to sell them the littlest package just so it's over and I'm done with. And it's like you said, like we want to be kind of problem solvers, right? Your lead comes in with an issue, a problem. You've got to kind of like ask some questions to get to the bottom of it. And then you present to them the solution to their problem. And the cost is secondary to the solution. Like
Agreed.
if they need a 3-month program, then it's going to cost this much. If your client has, you know, a 4-month off season, there's 4 months of training and they require 3 days a week. This is the cost for that. So the solution comes first, and then the cost is associated with the solution. You know what I mean?
Totally.
100%.
I mean, like you were saying, like that is what makes it pertinent and relevant. Otherwise, it's just a price tag with no value, right?
Yeah.
Love it. Take us away, Brett. Second round.
Oh, God. I need to check my notes here. What was my next one? Oh, yeah. Asking, and we've discussed this before, but asking can be more powerful than telling. We're talking about myths, right? Telling or talking at your client might not be as effective as just listening. Especially on like first impressions or kind of near first impressions. And,
Agreed.
you know, something we've talked about before is somebody comes in with like a terrible misconception, like, oh, if my knees go over my toes, they're going to explode. You know, your first instinct is to be like, oh, no. But that immediately gets them on the defensive. And so instead it's like, well, why do you think that? And start asking some questions about how they got there. You're going to get way more good information out of it. and the client is going to feel like they're being listened to and heard rather than just being told what to do.
And steamrolled. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think what that makes me think of is, to your point, you kind of said it right at the end, where from a client care perspective, I think people feeling like you've listened to them, we talk about trust a lot, but really, I think any relationship, and in this case, like a trainer-client relationship, is a foundational element of that is trust. And people feeling heard and listened to really matters. The other thing, to your point, when you talked about people coming in with misconceptions, so I also thought of this in the context of, I'm chronically online, so you see a lot of like internet debates, and 99% of them are not fruitful. It's not worth engaging. However, there's a term that I really like called street epistemology. So epistemology.
Before.
That's great.
Yeah, I think I've brought this up before, but essentially, if people haven't heard this, just as a reminder, so epistemology really is just essentially like a way of thinking, a way of discovering truth. I usually say like the scientific method is kind of our most proven epistemology that we have. Street epistemology is just using those skills as a means of productively and very skillfully debating. And it starts with, to your point, like asking questions. Because if I just say, if you make a statement, if you're like, your knees shouldn't go past your toes, and I go, well, no, they can, you're wrong. We are immediately just like in an argument, and we're both digging our heels in, and there is the no man's land sort of exists, and neither of us venture into it. Whereas if I go, oh, like where did you hear that? Or what do you mean by that? What context? And you can start to facilitate a conversation, and there's a greater ability to reach common ground. And even if I think you're wrong, the way for me to demonstrate my point is actually by asking you first and letting you talk your way through what your position is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also sometimes, to your point, sometimes what people will say superficially is not necessarily like that. There's way more depth to it. And that's where sometimes like the nuances of language and meaning by asking these questions can actually help you flesh out what they actually mean. They might be saying, don't go over your toes as perhaps like knees don't go over your toes as a blanket statement, but there might actually be way more nuance to it. And they just didn't have the chance to get to it. And so having the chance to actually like flesh it out and being curious, that's definitely a theme that's come up on numerous of our podcasts, not only with guests, but also just the three of us. Remaining curious and leading with that is a leadership move, and it helps you lead them in a manner that's going to be fruitful for them in a variety of contexts.
Have you guys seen Ted Lasso? There's that.
I was just going to say that. Yes.
In that dark game, where is it a Walt Whitman quote? Be curious, not
I think it's Walt Whitman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, when he smokes the guy in darts, you were saying. Yeah.
Be curious, not judgmental. And
100%.
this is what it boils down to, right? And in anything in life, there's another really, really incredible commencement speech, or something like that from. Oh Lord, I got one of his books back here. David Foster Wallace, called "This Is
Love
Water."
David Foster Wallace.
Yeah.
Look it up if you haven't already. It's so powerful. But that's kind of like the gist of it is like, be curious and be empathetic. And that's the hard part of life. It's not getting through it and succeeding and making $1 million. It's getting through life and maintaining your humanity and connection with others throughout. Anyways, getting real deep here.
I love it, man. No, that's great. I vibe with that 100%. Take us away.
Myth 5. So making content that's controversial, contrarian, or contentious might help you in the short term, but it is going to hurt you in the long term. So
I feel like
there's
that quote is contrarian and contentious.
Only
There's
sift you in absolutes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Join the dark side. There's a term that I heard actually from Chris Williamson on the Modern Wisdom podcast, and the term is called limbic hijacking. Mm-hmm. So it is a social media tool, like it's a marketing tool that people employ in social media. And essentially it takes advantage of the fact that when you have these hot takes, controversy, certain words like in headlines draw people's attention because it takes advantage of essentially our animalistic instinct to be drawn to something that's more controversial, right? The problem with it is you have to up the ante over time. And can be this really delicate balance. And I think a lot of people in the marketing world, Paul said this yesterday, I believe. Nick Shaw, when we had him on months ago, talked about this with their marketing strategy, where, the clickbait type marketing you can use maybe for a title and like your thumbnail, but the content itself needs to be something that's got some like guts to it. The problem is what happens is people will find that type of content that, it's let's say like a roast type video. So this is going to be ironic because I'm going to call somebody out, but I think of somebody like Greg Doucette. If you look at Greg Doucette's content from years ago, he wasn't yelling as much. He wasn't necessarily ripping into other people in the industry the same way. But what happened was the videos on YouTube that he had that succeeded the most are the ones when he called out so-and-so, called out Dr. Mike or something like that. And then each video after that became a little bit more. And then all of the videos were like that. And all of them, he's screaming, and all of them have this really crazy title. And the problem is you get to this point where eventually your content is so removed from anything that's actually productive. You've lost the original audience that would actually potentially like enjoy your content, and you're stuck constantly trying to up the ante. And eventually you can't. The thing I will add as a corollary to that, and I tried to find a way where this didn't feel targeted, but I think it's just the reality of the internet space, the social media space, is I think that very similarly, a lot of women posting content online, like booty shots in their pictures and stuff like that, will draw more views, more engagement, whatever it happens to be. And that could be very enticing. The problem is let's say if you're an online coach, well, you end up, say you end up with 10,000 followers and 8,000 of them are just people who just want to look at your pictures that, to them, it's like softcore porn or something like that.
Yeah. That's the only reason why they're there.
And 8,000 of those people are never going to buy your coaching services. So you have a large following, but is the funnel actually that good? Like they're not high return leads. So
totally. Yeah. There's a term in marketing that when you were talking, it reminded me of, which is it's a race to the bottom. So in the same way we're reducing your rates and selling exclusively with discounts is in many ways a race to the bottom. This feels like a race to the bottom when it comes to, I don't know, values or something like that. But it feels similar, where it's like there's this cycle that's set in motion, and you feel this need to continue with similar behavior and to up the ante. In the case of a sale, it would be about making the sales more aggressive. Or in the case of sensationalized content, it's about making it more controversial or, more triggering. And then also you start conditioning your audience to also expect that of you. Yeah. And it ends up being this vicious cycle that is really difficult to get out of. So I would agree. I think that, the way that I tend to think about it, and I'm very juvenile with this, so take what I'm saying with all of the salt.
The whole shaker.
The whole shaker cup of salt is storytelling. I think that I think storytelling's a far better way to go about marketing, getting good at storytelling in contrast to just sensationalized content for the sake of sensationalized content. And I think that the folks that leverage shock and awe are actually just really good storytellers. Mm-hmm. And they know how to hook us with their attention. They know how to hook our attention, but that it isn't, like you were saying, like sensationalized content without guts. Yeah. So it's genuinely, and I think you know this, right? Because when we were traveling around Canada, I picked up a book on storytelling because I want to get better at it. Because I feel like it's one of my biggest Achilles heels or biggest opportunities at this point, which is if you can become a better storyteller, your ability to sell people on anything, whether it be a product or even just an idea, becomes better, generally speaking. So yeah, I would encourage people to lean more into storytelling than sensationalized stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Brett?
It kind of reminds me of like the idea that like the easiest way to get a correct answer online isn't to post a question, but to post the wrong information. And somebody's going to get mad and correct you. Whereas if you just ask a question, nobody's that eager to help, but like they want to be right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a common thing on Reddit.
Yeah.
I heard that with people that are like programmers or coders, they'll post the wrong code and everyone like jumps down their throat. And that's how they get the right answer, as opposed to, as you said, being like, hey, like I can't quite figure out X, Y, and Z.
Lend me a hand or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
I don't know what that says about humanity, but
I mean, like the whole like limbic, what was it? The
limbic hijacking.
Limbic hijacking. Like it's just like engaging with like anger and fear, right? Like just like, you know, you want to be angry and you see it in like news stories, like so-and-so eviscerates so-and-so. And then you read the story and it's like they had a conversation and a light disagreement. And it's like, yeah.
Man, there's one, is because I consume a lot of F1 content. The F1 world is just like, what's the term? Ripe with that kind of stuff, where it'll be like breaking news, Lewis Hamilton, and then you click on it and it's like his sandwich that he had for lunch. And you're like, you're fucking kidding me, you know? Or it'll be like breaking news, big development, and it'll be information that came out 6 months ago, but they're re-releasing it. You know, like, fuck's sake! Like it would have been nice to learn more about this thing had things developed, and I just wasted 12 seconds of
like
my
what
life.
Kind of sandwich?
yeah. Okay,
he's vegan, I'm pretty sure. So there's probably some like interesting toppings on there.
For sure, yeah, he is. And but actually, on that note, before I get to my second myth, what are your favorite sandwiches?
I'm a big breakfast sandwich guy, so. Like slap some runny eggs on that bitch, put some cheese, put some bacon, some sourdough.
That's a slutty sandwich. Sandwich. Yeah.
That, or there's a place in Ottawa, I'm sure it's all around, called Sandwich Factory. And I've gone a couple times, maybe 2 or 3 times. And it's essentially just like a club sandwich. It's a triple layer. I think it's French bread is what they call it. And, I've gotten it a couple times, and one of the options for toppings you can put on it is chips. And I'm like, holy shit, this brings me back to like grade 2, like pool parties. So I've gotten that when I've gone there, and there's something about like the nostalgia of having chips on a sandwich is just, it's hard to beat, man.
I mean, you got a full body smile going on right now. So that's
lit
really
right
funny.
Up. I got to one that I haven't had in probably like close to 20 years, and I still remember it, was my dad would make pork roast, and with the leftovers, he would slice it thin and make sandwiches out of it. Holy crap, man. Like my families they're pretty good cooks too. So just like juicy and like flavorful, so good. And then the other one was one I made myself a couple of Christmases ago. Had some leftover turkey and, you know, your traditional like leftover turkey sandwich. I was eating it on the ski hill, so it wasn't like it was like a hot turkey sandwich or anything. But what I did, I had made this kind of like salad that I stole from Bon Appetit that had some like Asian pears on it. And so I sliced up the pears and put it on the sandwich and just get that like sweet crunch that cuts through all the like richness. It was pretty good. I'm looking forward to doing that again this year.
E.T., nice. How about you?
Yeah.
For me, it's a Cubano, like Cubano sandwiches.
I've never had a Cubano.
Man, yeah, I fuck with Cubanos. So I don't know how I would describe it, but it ends up being like a shaved pork or ham of sorts, or a variety of different kinds, mustard, mayo, cheese, pickles, and pickle.
Yeah.
And then you panini press it. It is incredible. Absolutely incredible. For me, Ryan, it's by far the best sandwiches I've ever had have been Cubanos.
There's a place near Bank and just north of Riverside, just on the north side of the bridge, that does Cubanos. I'll meet you there for a date.
Hell yeah.
Dope.
Hell yeah. I mean, the three of us. Let's go.
Next time you're in town.
Yeah, absolutely.
True.
Yeah, legit. Like, let's pencil that in. All right. My second one here, second myth. What is it? This is going to be six. Because 2 times 3 is 6. Yeah. Nice. Ryan's our, actually, who's better at math, Ryan or Brett?
I'll give it to Ryan. Sometimes I do some geometry homework for fun. It's like really satisfying for my weird brain. But I'd be willing to bet he went to school for like physics. I'm a French major, man.
Yeah. I got a like university calculus credit while I was in high school. Like I'm a big math nerd.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So you guys can hold me accountable with the mathematics. I already shit the bed within the first 20 seconds of this show. So
3 times 4 is hard, man.
Oh man. Yeah, sometimes. All right. So sixth myth. Wow. Why failing to niche down is hurting you, and how to niche down, without necessarily limiting yourself. So I think there's some misconceptions with niching down because people view it only in one way. But in reality, I think there's another angle to niching down that I think is really powerful. Most people, when they think about niching down, it's about niching down as very specific, like demographic, like who do I help and what are the problems that they have, and how do I serve them from like a very strict kind of service perspective. And when people do that, naturally what they see is they see their pool of available clients go from really, really broad to a sliver. And they're like, fuck, that's terrifying. But there's an angle of niching down that I think doesn't get enough of a recognition, which is in many ways, niching down also makes reference to like niching down on who you are as a person. What are your quirks, your beliefs? And what sets you apart as a practitioner? Like, what's your flavor of personal training that you bring to the table? And that flavor is going to be something that's going to attract people that really vibe with what you're putting down. And it's going to repel people that were going to be shit fits anyways. And so there's a few things here. Number one, niching down doesn't limit you because in the grand scheme of things, there are hundreds of thousands or like millions of people that need help. And so in reality, even if you niche down, you're getting a small piece of the pie. There are ample opportunities for you. In addition to that, if you try to speak to everyone, you ultimately end up speaking to no one. When it comes to marketing, there's a really simple analogy, which is fishing. So if you're looking to catch a certain type of fish, you want to know where are the fish, and then also what types of lures are they interested in, right? So if you're looking to like fish for bass, which is maybe a client that has a certain issue, you want to make sure that you position your lure where bass are. So you don't want to go fishing for bass in a lake that has pike. That would be kind of silly, right? But then also you want to ask yourself, well, like what do bass give a shit about? And then how can I put that in front of them to get their attention? And the relevance of that within the context of the training world is people, how they relate to their challenges and their pain points usually relate with very specific language. Like I'm frustrated by this, or in the case of like my in-person training business, do you feel like your body's letting you down was one that my chronic pain folks kept saying. That was some language that my clients used. And so when it came to my marketing, I would use that because I wanted to find people that had those challenges so that I could help them, right? And so niching down, getting clarity about who you serve and who you don't serve informs the language and then ultimately helps you find your people. But then the other angle of it, like I alluded to earlier, is also just like getting clarity of like, who are you and who are you not, right? And like there's an exercise that I learned a little while ago that I really like from Mallory Rowan, where she talked about like, what are these swords that you would die on, or what are the hills that you would die on? Or like, what is something that you really believe really strongly within your career that if you heard someone bring it up at a party, you would actively confront them because you think really strongly about it. And you're like, nope, like this is a line I refuse to tolerate anything other than like taking you down right now, and like getting clarity on some of the things that you have really strong positions on can shed light on some of your belief systems and some of the things that set you apart from your peers. And that ends up being like an aspect of your superpower. It ends up being the types of like one of the many things that will actively attract and actively repel. And so once again, niching down isn't just about getting ultra narrow. It's also about getting ultra clear on who are you as a practitioner and who are you as a person.
Can I add a little bit of nuance
Yeah, of course,
to that? Because I
need some eggnog to drink.
That's right.
I think if you're a new trainer, and especially a young new trainer, you don't have to rush that process. It might take you a bit of time to figure out who you are and who your clients are, and having a lot of experience with different clients are going to inform that. I was always involved in a lot of sports, so I think coaching for athletic development was kind of a natural fit. But I do have a lot of civilians, and it took me a while to figure out a lot of clients that I hung on to for a really long time. They didn't really seem to have a lot in common other than a weird amount of doctors I've trained. And I remember asking one of my clients, what is my audience? What is my niche, do you think? And she was like, high functioning weirdos. And I was like, you know what? That's not that far off. A lot of type A personalities and quirky folk. And we seem to kind of gel because I'm, a quirky folk too. But I've kind of leaned a little bit more and allowed the time to develop into kind of more of a sport directed coach. And it's still happening too. And it's still changing. And I'm going to allow myself the grace to potentially move in a different direction if interests take me elsewhere too.
100%.
Yeah, I'm going to, what Brett said kind of is a perfect segue, because what I was thinking about when you said niche down, in the way, I'm going to agree with it in a way that's slightly different. So I'll honestly say, I think within my business, I don't know how strongly I've considered niching down in terms of an audience, but I've niched down in terms of my interests. Mm-hmm. And I think the end result ends up being very similar, because then it attracts a certain type of client and so on and so forth. But, as we've probably talked about here, I have some seemingly ADHD tendencies, so it's very easy for me to get sucked into something.
I was going to ask you,
and
Ryan,
I just kind of let that.
Is it niching down or is it hyperfocus?
Fuck if I know, honestly. I don't know. I just do what I do, man. But yeah, I'll have areas of interest and I just allow myself to be interested in that and learn about it. And I think that also then reflects in, the type of clientele that I work with, because I will develop a certain set of knowledge around certain contexts. I also think that passion is very infectious. So I think most of the, clients that work with me, because I do predominantly work with physique type clients, and it's something I care really strongly about. And I find the science kind of behind it really fascinating. So I think the end result is still very similar, but it more comes, I think, from an intrinsic standpoint, as opposed to asking myself, what kind of client do I want to attract? It's what kind of stuff am I interested in? And I just dive into that and then let the chips fall as they may, which leads me to I'm going to refer back to, again, I think it was the Chris Williamson podcast, but I heard this really interesting analogy that somebody brought up. Excuse me. It was talking about using other successful people as a template. So ET obviously has done really well. We're all kind of career fitness professionals. I haven't had the same approach as you. Mm-hmm. And we both had different levels of success. So the analogy is, somebody was talking about how tennis has gone through this really interesting era, almost unlike any other sport, where undisputably the three greatest tennis players of all time, their careers overlapped. So in Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic, they are the only three men's tennis players to have won 20 Grand Slams plus. And if you watched Nadal warm up and practice, he's very aggressive. He hits the ball really hard. He's ripping his shoes up on the court because he's sliding so hard into every shot. And you go if I want to be successful, I've got to be like Nadal. And then you look at Djokovic, and he is an absolute tactician. His footwork is pristine. Every shot is perfect. He's thinking his way on the court, very different than Nadal. And you go, oh, okay, well, if I need to be successful, then I got to be this tactician. And then you look over on the other court and you see Federer and he's hitting trick shots and he's joking with people and he's like high-fiving and he's just got a big smile on his face. So you have these three players that have all become essentially the top three in whatever order you want to put them of all time in their sport, with three very different personalities and three very different ways of approaching their sport. And I think what's important to note there, and both ET and Brett, you guys kind of alluded to this, I think there's an element of knowing yourself. And your approach should be dictated by like who you are as a person, or at least how you understand yourself to be as a person at that time. Mm-hmm. So like, I'll admit I'm terrible at playing the game when it comes to a marketing perspective. So I just lean all in on being myself and being really authentic. And in some ways, it's probably much less polished than others. And I probably miss out on certain opportunities. But the thing that draws certain clients to me is the fact that they really appreciate that level of being authentic. So all of that to say, I agree. And
yeah, totally. Well, what's interesting is I find, like you mentioned, Brett, like this adds a lot of really great nuance. And I would say other, how would I say, like other discussions that flow outwards from like talking about like this idea of niching down on yourself. What I was kind of alluding to there is all the stuff that you guys talked about as well, which is like know yourself and lean into that. Like Ryan should absolutely not try to be an ET. I absolutely shouldn't try to be a Ryan, and Brett should absolutely not to try to be a hybrid of either of us. Like lean into your quirks, lean into your interests, your passions, and like the things that genuinely make you. Because even then, if you manage to pull it off being fake for a while and you manage to attract a few clients, trust me, because I've tried it, it's fucking exhausting trying to be someone that you're not. And even like in a context unrelated to training, you see that in relationships all the time, where people put up a front as a means of meeting someone, they get the date, they lock down the person, and then they slow drip who they actually are into the relationship. And then finally the person finds out who they actually are. And they're like, I didn't sign up for this. You know, this is like false advertising, you know? So yeah, just like lead with who you actually are, trusting that there are enough opportunities out there and the right people will be attracted to who you are, and you absolutely will repel others, but that's okay. You can't have the whole pie anyways.
There's a wonderful quote by, I think it was Linda Lovelace, who said, "You can be the sweetest peach in the world. Some people just don't like peaches."
I like that.
Amen.
I like that.
Right. Yeah, my turn.
It's your turn. Sorry, I was going to cut you out.
On the seventh day of Liftmas, my two friends said to me,
Brett Patterson gave to me,
you don't need a network. That's the myth. The reality is, both, I think, not only like having some trainers around you, but also people in other industries, healthcare professionals. Yeah. But I also think there's a value to having people in your network. You know, I was part of a networking group for the last like 3 years. And there was a few kind of people working in the health and wellness field, but like there's like mortgage agents and lawyers and you know, all sorts of people in other industries. And I think there's a really big value when you're having, if you're the type of person who's having like face-to-face conversations with your clients, and something comes up about like, oh yeah, my AC just busted, and you're like, I know an awesome guy, and like, you know,
is that an AC joint or an air conditioner? Legit, I'm confused. What are we talking about here?
HVAC.
Oh, okay.
But like having that in your back pocket is like added value, like, you know, and if you
Absolutely.
can throw that at your clients, and then obviously the obvious, you know, go-to is like, you know, somebody complaining about, you know, something that's a little bit beyond your scope of practice, and you can refer them to them. Or if you've got a full roster and or somebody is not your client, doesn't fit within your schedule, you can pass them to another trainer. And then psychologically, so throughout COVID, you know, I went independent, did online training, and like didn't have a lot of trainers in my network, and realized after a while I didn't have a lot of people just to like talk shop with and feel competent and like, you know, work through issues, and like after a while kind of started to feel a bit lonely. And kind of, Etienne, reconnecting with you was kind of like a big part of it. Finding a new job where I was working around other trainers, and suddenly I felt a lot more confident just for the fact, like, I didn't gain any new knowledge, but I'm just around people that I can demonstrate my knowledge to, in different ways. And I think that's really important. So yeah, make a network, even if it's not just trainers, but trainers are also important, or people kind of, you know, similar to your field.
If I may, real quick, jump in. Ryan and I think it was maybe 6 weeks or maybe 2 months at this point when we interviewed Chris Fudge. I was going through his episode recently, getting it ready for release. We're looking at probably late December, early Jan. And as I was going through, he mentioned something that really echoes in different language, but he really echoes what you're saying here, Brett, at least in part, which is that, like, especially when you surround yourself with excellent people, how you can get excellent or you can get really good by accident. And he used Good Life Place Orleans as an example. And this is going to sound like I'm tooting my horn, but I'm not. Good Life Place Orleans, when it came to the co-ed gyms in Ottawa, was one of the smallest. We also had, when it came to available clients to pull from on like a daily basis, we had some of the lowest check-ins in the city. And although we weren't a top performer when it came to total revenue, that club produced a variety of fitness professionals. Myself, who, you know, went into a management position, you know, RTS, teaching within Canada, et cetera, launching the Exercise Mechanic, and now I get to work with you guys, which is fantastic. And you also think about within the Good Life culture, that one gym produced two of the three level 7 trainers in all of Canada came out of this small gym. That isn't an accident. It was a pleasant ripple effect flowing outwards from the culture that was created there by previous management. Shout out to Luke Rowan and Mike. What's his name? Forgetting his last name. Two really fantastic managers that we had that really created a culture that once they got that ball rolling, there was no stopping it. Even when we got kind of subpar managers come in later on, once those gentlemen moved on, we had other people come in, and they couldn't fuck with the momentum that we had. Like, they would try to get us to do things a different way that would be different than perhaps what our values would tell us to do. And we were like, no. And the whole gym would put their feet down, like, nope, this is how it works. And we would still, you know, hit our budgets and all that stuff, but the manager wouldn't get their way just because of the power of the environment. And so this is a little bit of a different thing than what you're talking about there, Brett. But I think that, like, at least for me, it's a very concrete example in my life of how I was very fortunate to be injected, excuse me, into a certain environment surrounded by certain people. And my own intrinsic motivation naturally propelled me forward in my life, but a huge incalculable amount of that propulsion was just due to my environment and my peers. So if you want to get really good, try to find a way to insert yourself into environments where people are excellent and they can rub off on you.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I think everything you guys said, I couldn't agree more. And if I were to add, I guess, just another example of how your network has such a like influence on your business as a trainer or a coach or just fitness professional. And I would actually say, I think that this is an endorsement of spending time at some point, you know, early in your career working in a commercial gym, because you'll just have an exposure to so many more people than you would otherwise. I think that's one of the difficulties with people who start as an online coach is they maybe don't have a network to start with. So I guess basically two major contracts, if you will, that we have with the exercise mechanic as educators, both stemmed from just personal relationships that we had with individuals that worked within those corporations. And the thing really that, there are tons and tons of providers. And the thing that really allowed us to stand out was just the fact that we knew who the individuals were in charge. And
Absolutely.
We have opportunities to grow as an education platform, and it just stemmed from having a network. So yeah, I agree completely, Brett. I think every industry, we know that networking is important. And in particular, the fitness world is a people-driven industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that your network matters that much more.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you mentioned that working environment that you had, ATN, because like I've worked objectively bad jobs with great people, and it makes the time go by faster. It just like it makes it such a better experience. And it reminds me of a guy I used to play music with occasionally, and he was a brilliant musician, and he was a bluegrass player, which is a genre that very much exists in the live setting. Like you jam constantly, and like you're there to play and play off of other people, similar to kind of like jazz is a little bit. It's made to be a kind of communication, a live communication with each other. And jamming with him, he would make everybody at the jam better just for him being there, because he would be there setting the tempo. He would be giving space and giving encouragement to do solos for people who maybe wouldn't stretch that far. And like having people like that in your environment to like allow you to push and stretch is awesome. I miss that guy. Actually, he's on the West Coast, so I wish I could jam with him again.
All right, my third point. I guess I didn't really write these as myths, but whatever.
I don't think any of us
letting
did.
your own training fall off will hurt your business. You should be selfish about your own training. So for me, this boils down to essentially two major aspects. The first being, I think, again, to refer back to a recent call we had, the trainer and client relationship, there is a power dynamic at play. And clients look up to you. Whether you like it or not, they look up to you. They look to you for inspiration. And if you are trying to encourage them to fit fitness and healthy eating into their busy lifestyles, and you are unable to do so yourself, you're not leading by example.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important aspect. The other thing as well is, we talk about niching down or whatever. If you look at the overwhelming majority of coaches and trainers out there, they all, I don't want to say excel, but they all push their own training to a level that is beyond what most people will do. So to use Chris as an example, one of the things that draws people to Chris, that gets him attention, is he's competed in powerlifting for years and years. He's pursuing CrossFit and stuff like that, right? So he's always competing in something. He's always pushing his training. It gets people looking at you. If you have somebody who, like, we see this all the time, certainly within the bodybuilding world, like you could be a crap coach. And if you are, a top national level competitor or an IFBB pro, the fact that you are someone who's competing, people look at you differently and it draws a certain level of attention. And the flip side of that is, if you are not doing those things, people aren't going to look at you the same way. Like, you don't cause any kind of inspiration for them. They don't look at you as somebody that they want to aspire to be.
Totally. I try to every year be in better shape than any of my skiers on the uni ski team. And as the team grows and gets more competitive, it's getting harder and harder, but I think I still got them. We'll see what comes next year, but yeah, definitely. And it's just like, you can chat a bit more with your clients. Like I unfortunately have been in positions where I've been in less good shape or just not spending the time I should. And that was the nature of like having a child in the pandemic and working from home. And it's like, when do you train? When like you get off a call and it's like, oh, time to hold the baby. So I don't regret it. It was just kind of what life brought me. But you know, your clients come to you with like a success and it's like, hey, I just like hit this milestone, and you're like, that's great, and like kind of sad because you're not hitting those milestones, you know. And you know, you can't connect with them quite as well. So yeah, definitely important.
Yeah. And the only thing I have to add to what you guys said is two thoughts. I've found, especially when, if I think back to my journey, with RTS specifically, when I did their entry level program, when I did their mastery program, and then when I was instructing for them, and I started running study groups and those types of things. At that time, my training was something I was taking very seriously. And I would argue that probably the thing that I took the most seriously with my training was two variables. Number one was hard work, is train hard. And then the second was actually experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
And through experimenting for years, it really broadened my toolbox. And it's funny because it's like there's exercises that are popular now. I fucking did them 6 years ago, and it's just like, yeah, like cool, like, but also like I'm not that infatuated by it. I've gone through my infatuation phase 6 years ago, kind of thing. And the reason why I'm saying that is that experimentation, like going hard in the paint with regards to like being curious and experimenting, is really empowering, because there are going to be moments when all of those subtle nuances will likely serve the person that's in front of you. And you can either experiment on the fly with the pressure of hoping that it'll work, or you can have some things that you've already tested and you won't fumble through it. And the likelihood of success will be just that much greater. And then the second thing that I want to add to that has to do with, to draw a parallel with my own current journey right now. Like within the last year and a half, I went from absolutely hating running, hating it with a capital H, underlined, in bold, highlighted, to really finding an enjoyment in it and actively pursuing trail running for a variety of reasons. One of which is that it just, being in Switzerland, it's the mecca of that sport. But I digress. What I've noticed is that through doing something completely different, there's a transferability or a transference of the skills that I've acquired in the past, and all the things that I've used are useful now. And all of the novelty with figuring out how I can best train now, which is, not only the challenges flowing outwards from this new sport that I've never done before and figuring that out, how to like manage running volume, elevation gain volume, and strength training volume, managing all of that with the demands of life, has led to this being a really rich season of learning for me, that had I not leaned into that interest of mine and wanting to like sink my teeth into that opportunity being here in Switzerland right now, I wouldn't have had all of these opportunities. And what's really cool is that a lot of these things that I'm learning have had really positive effects with my clients that I'm working with. And only one of them out of like 19 at this point is doing any kind of running. All of the others, it's like chronic pain management, wanting to feel better or be healthier, and like muscle gain and body comp. Like that's like the majority of the people that I'm working with right now. And all the things I'm learning right now are useful with those folks. So yeah, I think that like for me, one of the big reasons for taking one's training seriously and exploring your passions and your curiosities has to do with how it stretches you as a practitioner and how it broadens your horizons in terms of populations you can work with, and it deepens your skill set.
Mm-hmm. Be your own guinea pig.
Yeah. 100%. And like, that's one of the things that you were saying, Rye, that like really, how would I say? I think it's one of Chris Fudge's greatest strengths. He has done some crazy shit to himself that, like, I don't know if you remember this on the podcast that we did with him. He played around with like ultra aggressive water cutting. Yeah. And he filled like his bathtub with water that was like almost boiling hot. And he was under the water and only his nose was above. Everything else was below. And he could just feel his heart going crazy. And he weighed himself before and after, and he lost like, I don't know how many pounds over the course of a matter of minutes in the bathtub, just because of the intensity of the heat, and his body was just trying to cool him down. And, what's the relevance of that with your average population? Probably not very much, but there's value in that practice, in getting into the habit of like stretching yourself for the sake of discovering new tools and also even discovering new things about yourself.
Yeah. Agreed.
Sweet.
I guess your turn.
Let it rip. Let's do it. All right. Number 9, why selling with fear is less effective than hope and optimism. This is one that I feel really strongly about. I'm realizing that a lot of my comments today are about sales. Not sure why. But it is something that I feel, it is something that I feel really strongly about. And I'd be really curious to hear your take on this. I think that like, even if someone's in a shitty situation, you can find an optimistic narrative. And I find that in the grand scheme of things, fear can be powerful motivators in the short term, but like hope and optimism is a very sustainable internal fuel source that can really drive you forward. And so like, that's one reason, but truly, I've also just found it more effective acutely. And I'd be really curious to hear your take on this. But if I think back to when I was new in the industry as a fitness professional and I had no idea how to sell, and by sell, I guess what we're trying to say is like to get people bought into a journey. I mean, I wouldn't be bought into a journey that sounds shitty. And one that like maybe isn't going to be net enriching in my life. But if someone can spin a story that gets me to see how it's going to be really enriching, and it's going to be net positive, and it's going to be filled with challenges and all these things, and it's going to be net enriching, that's just so much more compelling as a means of getting buy-in. Not only for me, but I've found that for my clients. So my recommendation would be stop trying to scare people into signing up with you, because like we talked about earlier, even if you do, and you do get them, it's probably going to be a shit client. Whereas if you can get people that are bought in to work with you for the right reasons, they're going to be a joy to work with. They're usually going to be more compliant as well. And so it just ends up being net positive in every single category, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that because I think we see completely eye to eye on this. The only thing I would add, I guess, maybe a little bit more context. So I think that you set the tone very differently for the relationship with the client when it is one that has come from essentially a negative place versus a positive place. I think that does change the trajectory of that client and trainer relationship. I would also add, because this is a practice that is very common, and I don't know if this is what you're alluding to by saying, using fear as like a selling strategy. It's very common to essentially see sales in the training world almost be like racketeering. Like you've created a problem for them and then you're selling them that you're the one with the solution, which is very different than them having a problem and coming to you. I think
yes, important
people
distinction.
have problems and you're there to help provide solutions and problem solve. That's amazing. I think that is positive in nature.
Agreed.
As opposed to, I'm going to try to choose my words carefully here. Certain like assessment protocols that are designed, failure is a part of the design.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you might expose, and I put that in quotations, expose issues that a client has that they're not actually having trouble with in their real life, but you've now created problems that you're now trying to sell them on the solution for it. So I take a lot of issue with that.
That's pretty much
I think
exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, I sort of draw the link. Like I literally think it's racketeering, because by definition, racketeering creates a problem and then, sells the solution to it. So other than that, yeah, like I don't have much else to add. I think you're completely spot on.
Yeah.
On a personal level, like hope and optimism for me are like a survival tool. Like I can very easily jump into some deep pits. And it was actually something that stuck with me for a lot of years that I heard from you, ET, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, was that like we lie to ourselves all the time. You might as well lie to yourself in a way that's going to take you to a good place than, tell yourself lies that are just going to like keep you in bed all day. And so like, I have to reaffirm to myself that like the world is a good place and people are, people are kind, and that it's going to be a great place to live for my child, and all of these kind of reaffirmations. And they might all be bullshit, but like, so is, the world sucks and it's all going to burn and there's no reason for living. That's also bullshit. So I might as well tell myself the good things, because at least that's going to keep me going. And then to my clients, or like in like a sales perspective, I do think there has to be an element of like dissatisfaction of where you are now to be able to want to change and promote change. Totally. However, if you lean too hard into that, it just becomes self-hatred, and you can't, as you said, it doesn't take you that far or that long. And so it, yes, that dissatisfaction and discomfort with where you are has to be there to be able to change and want to go elsewhere. It has to come from a place of love and like, I want to make this change because I deserve it and I love myself, and not I need to make this change because I hate where I am now and it disgusts me. There's a distinct mindset difference between that.
100%. 100%. Last time around, Brett, take us away, man. Yeah,
all
man.
Right. This is going to be a lot less deep than that last one, but working in your business is important, but working on your business is importanter. It's easy, especially if you're very busy, to get stuck on just kind of like the day-to-day grind and like seeing your clients and writing programs and all that stuff, and not taking a step back and the 50,000 foot view. And, we talked about like values, and like actually taking some time to think and write that stuff down, I think is really important. But like also like business strategy and like, I spent a ton of time thinking about like my logo, because I wanted something that was like really representative of me and who I am. And I think that like you've got to try to set aside some time on your week to work on your business, even if it's just like, working on some new leads, but kind of like the big important, stuff that your business is, and not just get stuck in the weeds.
Yeah, I'll hop in on that, because I do completely agree. And I will say this as somebody who struggles with that. I think I'm going to butcher this, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it as best as possible. I think I saw a like Alex Hormozy post from a year ago, something like that. It was talking about how there are people who are the artist and people who are the businessman. And the business person, it doesn't matter what the industry is. They like to sell, they like the game, all of that. And the person who's the artist just wants to practice their craft. And I'm very much the craftsman in a lot of ways. I think that on one hand, depending on the size of your operation, part of being in business is you've got to wear many hats and you do what you've got to do. What I would encourage is, if people are in the position to be able to do so, is if you are like me and you are far more the craftsman than anything else, it doesn't mean that the business side isn't important. And I think if you are able to, you should outsource. Like, understand where your limitations may be, whether that be skill or even just interest and attention. I'm very lucky that within my business, all of the front facing stuff I really enjoy. I love doing podcasts. I like, dealing with clients. I like doing the, not for my business, but for the exercise mechanic. I love writing content. I like teaching it. Anything front facing, anything I can geek out. I love that shit. I hate dealing with billing. I hate dealing with our website.
On that point, it took you how long to send me the first invoice?
Yeah.
To the point, I sent you, I'm like, hey man, bill me for X amount. I think it was longer than a month, bro. And I was like,
might have been.
Dude, I'm sitting on this money. I need you to invoice me so that I can send it your way. And you're like, yeah, I'll do it. And then hey man, please send it my way. A few days later. Yeah.
Like I'm a great example of somebody where, there's what would you do if you won the lottery game? I would keep doing what I do. Like I love the stuff that I do and I love what I'm in. And the business side is like an unfortunate byproduct. Mm-hmm. And I would say I'm smart enough to know that about myself. So like I didn't make my website. I didn't set up my billing. There are some aspects, because you have to, I sort of deal with, but as much as I can outsource that and leave it to somebody else who is good at it, I do. Because the in-person and the content stuff I really enjoy. So, what was the know thyself was one of our kind of earlier points. I think that also applies to the working in or working on your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have much to say that you guys haven't covered, other than it is really important. And working in your business is undoubtedly important to service the people to who you've made promises. Working on your business is what sets the compass and allows you to grow generally. And you need both. You need high quality service, and you generally speaking need some kind of strategy and knowing where you're going. And, and to like what Ryan mentioned, where like, if you can outsource, generally speaking, at least in my experience, like at the beginning of the journey, you can't bring on a CEO or someone else to make some of these other decisions. You have to wear a lot of these other hats. And there's a really interesting, I would say good book. I think it's called The E-Myth. Have you guys heard of this book? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so very, very simply, it takes what Alex Hormozi was talking about, Ryan, that you shared, and it adds a little bit more nuance to it, which is that it talks about in this book, I forget the author, talk about how there are three major hats that you'll wear in the entrepreneurial world, especially at the beginning. There's the technician, which is what you love, right? There's the manager, which is layer above the technician, making sure that the technician's doing what they should be doing. Then there's the visionary. And at the beginning, you need to wear all three. And I'm someone who I definitely have a leaning towards technician. Technician is my greatest strength. And I've had to develop competency with the management hat. And I mean, Ryan, you were one of my trainers back in the day. So you might argue that I have zero fucking competency with the management hat, which I probably would agree with you. And when it comes to visionary, I have always had visionary tendencies, but I've had a lot of trouble crystallizing it sufficiently to be able to act on it. And so for myself, it's always been really important to have a business coach all the time. And unfortunately for me, but fortunately for her, my business coach, who I think you all know, Mickey Anderson, she actually just broke up with me earlier this week, which is kind of funny. It's a happy but sad story. Yes. Happy because her company just got acquired. So she, which is a huge deal. She got acquired by like a multi-million-dollar company in the States. Dang. And so she's now their CMO. And as a result of this, she's just like, my schedule's slammed. Like, I can't give you the time that we normally would. And so I need to let you go. And I'm like, that's fine, man. Like, you do you. But like I'm actively in the market right now of looking for someone to help me bridge those gaps, like you mentioned, right? Because I'm like, I know there's things that I want to do, and at the end of my life, if I don't attempt to do them, and if I don't really try, I will be really disappointed in myself. And so I need to bring in someone who's better at this shit than I am to help me bring these things into life, And so initially, you need to like, I found for myself, there's tremendous value in getting in reps and developing some competency with some of those other hats that we're perhaps not the most proficient at. So that way, when you outsource it later on, or when you bring someone in, you have greater tools and perspectives to kind of pull from. So that's the only nuance that I would add to that. But generally speaking, I agree. Like, try to bring someone in, whether it be to support you with it, because working on your business and in are not the same skill sets at all. Like, they're not even close. They're diametrically different. So if you can bring someone in to help you to bridge that gap, or to just outright outsource it, that's a good strategy.
Good point.
All right, my last point. This is somewhat similar to one of Brett's, but always having a sale hurts your business. So very similar to when we were talking about, perceived value, so on and so forth. So all of that remains true if you're constantly running a sale. And I'm going to add 2 layers to that. So if I see a coach, because this is very common, where every single month they have a promotion or a sale, what you're telling me is the actual cost of your services. Mm-hmm. So your services are not $400 a month, they're $250, right? And the fact that you are constantly using this sales process, I also interpret that you're not doing very well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one thing. So if you're constantly trying to essentially drop your prices down, it's because you don't have a successful business. And then I start to ask myself why. It could be circumstance. It could be that you just deliver poor service. But if I'm a consumer and I see that, so I will, on the flip side, I'll say, to their credit, one of the things that N1 does is they don't do sales. Mm-hmm. And I think actually RTS is very similar to this. Like, the price is the price. And at the very least, like, I value them a lot as a company, so I'd love to take their stuff for a cheaper dollar or a cheaper price point. But I immediately go like, oh, they're like a high ticket item. They clearly have something to offer and they know it. And I think that perception is really important. And then what I would add to this is, I think you run the risk of potentially insulting the clients that you currently have. Mm-hmm. So yeah, totally. If you have people who are paying your top price point and you are constantly offering these sales, and now, let's say your standard client pays $400 a month and you have some sale and now clients are paying $250 a month. That other client that's paying top dollar is going to wonder why they're paying that price and everyone else isn't. Mm-hmm. If the service is exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that you not only run the risk of the perception from the outside of, maybe the quality of your service, etc. I think you also run the risk of potentially damaging relationships with the clients that you currently have.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. There's a music store in Ottawa. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. It was called like International Music. It's finally closed down. It was on the corner of like Saint Laurent and Donald. And they had signs in the window that was like, everything in the store 50% off, that were sun faded because they had been there for like 3 years.
Yeah, for sure.
I went in there once and like there's like, I don't know if the Google reviews page is still up for it since they're closed down, but it is hilarious. Like, everybody who walked in, as soon as, and like music stores.
What's it called again, Brett? I'm going to pull it up.
International Music, I think. Saint Laurent Donald. Anybody who walked in who didn't there's a lot of window shopping and trying stuff out in music stores, who didn't immediately indicate that they were going to buy something, the owner would like yell at and chase out of the store. And the whole like comment section or the review section is just stories of people who are like confused and like angry at this guy who just like yelled at them and kicked them out of the store. And then the occasional person who like actually bought an instrument and were like, oh yeah, he was super nice, I loved it. So yeah, like you don't want to have those sun faded 50% off signs, because then it's, yeah, as you said, right, it's just the price. It's
Exactly.
I agree.
I
I'm trying
mean,
to find
I don't
this
know
here.
about you, but that's how I approach sales. Is if people don't indicate immediately that they're going to buy, I just shout at them on a call.
yeah. Yeah, I've had
Winning
people in
strategy.
like the networking group and some people who I like coach skiing with occasionally say like, "Oh, do you have like a family and friends discount?" And let's say like the fee was like $100. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, the family and friends discount is $100."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's really so that actually, as ET looks this up, that brings up an interesting, I guess, side point. As a consumer, if you have a friend or family member that has a business, I can't remember where I read this, but I believe this wholeheartedly. Don't try to get deals from your friends that are running small businesses. Support their small business.
Yeah,
Like,
why would I want to pay you less? Like, you're my friend.
Yeah,
I
I
want you
agree
to succeed.
completely.
It's crazy.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So I just
All
looked
right,
it up.
ET.
Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. So I was hoping on being able to read some funny
There's,
reviews, but
I'll try to look up like an internet archive of it, because it was a riot.
Reddit,
Like,
for sure, it's on Reddit.
no,
Yeah.
like the Internet Archive is a website that will keep archive
okay.
stuff. Nothing
My
dies
man.
on the internet.
We'll have to circle back to this.
All right, ET, last point.
Yeah, last one of the 12 days of LIFTMAS is one that we've talked about many times, which is that the pursuit of absolute solutions to relative problems is a fundamental problem. You're searching for the wrong thing, generally speaking, in the industry. So for those that haven't heard this before, what we're talking about here is that, and this is non-sales related, contrary to my three other my three other points. Here we're talking about things from more of a kind of more macro perspective. The human experience is something that operates in the gray. It is not something that can be defined necessarily in black or whites, at least in my experience. And that's probably the most black and white statement you'll hear from me, paradoxically. So at the beginning of our career, it is natural to search for solutions that we can apply, that are simple, that we can use to, start getting in some reps, pun intended, which is fine. And I support that. And I actively encourage that actually at the beginning of careers for trainers. And I always also preface the journey, which is that inevitably these things that you're learning will fail you. They will, predictably. It's just a matter of time where you're going to meet someone and it's not going to work. And when they don't work, what are you going to do? How are you going to make those decisions? What are the things you're going to consider, and how much weight are you going to allocate to each of those individual components? Those are the questions. And I think we would in large part agree here that your ability to work with a broad spectrum.
We don't call them that anymore. Oh, broad spectrum.
You leave. Your ability to work with a wide spectrum of people boils down not to the amount of like cookie cutter programs that you've memorized, but rather it has to do with your depth of understanding of the variables that you're manipulating. So that way you can be artful and strategic in your application. And I used this example. I can't remember if it was in the Ottawa course, but made this parallel with like a chef or pasta sauce, even, right? And to keep it really, really simple, you look at like so many, like the vast majority of like various like flavors of pasta sauce that exist are and I can see you smirking, Ryan, because I know what you're thinking about, are the result of, in large part, like a manipulation of the same ingredients, but we're just changing the ratios and how they're manipulated. So it's like tomatoes, are they like roasted or not, whole or not, pureed, chunky, whatever, olive oil, onion, garlic, salt, pepper, like that's the base. And then maybe there's other things like chili flakes, et cetera. But in the grand scheme of things, most sauces are amalgamations of all of those different variables that they're just treated differently. And if you had to create a meal for someone who's in front of you and you had the opportunity to tailor it for them, and that they will respond better to extra chunky in contrast to smooth. Well, if they were going to respond to extra chunky, you send Ryan when he's dirty bulking. And if you
not anymore,
if you want smooth, you send me because I have no facial hair. But jokes aside, you know, it really is. I think that like getting comfortable with the gray, and this is something that one of my first mentors told me he probably in my first 6 months, and I'm really grateful for this. And he said that if you're uncomfortable with it depends, if you're uncomfortable with nuance or ambiguity, you are in the wrong profession and you should just outright leave. And he told me that when I was at a place in my career where I was like obsessed with kettlebells, and I was just like, this is the one tool that everyone needs. Until he smacked me about the head a little bit and kind of got me to think of like, oh, right, wait a minute. This one tool that I really enjoy for a variety of reasons isn't necessarily a good idea for someone who has like, you know, zero shoulder flexion and can't get their arms overhead. Like I'm not going to get them to do a snatch or something like that. Right. So I think that the industry as a whole, I think, is trending in this direction where it's becoming increasingly accepted and normalized for people to get comfortable with nuance and ambiguity, and people are getting more comfortable asking questions. And even within that tendency, there still is a little bit of a tendency for people to look for absolutes within the relative. And I think we just need to get really, really ultra comfortable with the relative, and to outright stop looking for the absolutes, because I think it doesn't help.
I feel like that's like the thesis statement of this podcast and business altogether. It's just like, yeah,
you know,
so I don't have anything to add on a helpful level, because I think you essentially said everything and we're completely aligned. I am going to expose you here because I think it's a hilarious story. The reason why I was chuckling is the pasta sauce analogy, which I actually think it's great. I think it is analogous to, you know, this whole philosophy that we try to teach as an organization. And I've heard it several times. So, you know, we were teaching, I think it might've been in Edmonton.
Was it Edmonton?
So
yeah.
I've heard, you know, this come up a couple of times. The way it is presented, because, you know, we've taught together enough times that I'm kind of familiar with the cadence. So I sort of know there's going to be this big display, this big conversation. You're going to get some people who are like, oh yeah. So ET's building it up. And he's like, you know, you have all of these ingredients that all these pasta sauces can be made from. There are so many pasta sauces that exist, like Prego. And that's it. That's all he said.
I had a total brain fart.
Burst out.
I was like, fuck.
Oh man, that is close to the hardest I think I've laughed in a course that we've taught.
It was a good moment.
So
man.
Funny.
It was a nice moment of like unplanned comic relief as well, because people got it. They were like, "Oh yeah, I get it," but then also I completely threw myself under the bus. You know? Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, man, that was great. That was really good.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, as we start to close, do you guys have any big plans for the holiday season?
Coaching a whole pile of skiing, going away to Saguenay, Quebec.
Saguenay.
I'm trying to pronounce it properly. It's not Saguenay, it's Saguenay.
Saguenay, yeah.
Yeah. Doing 4 days of ski camp. Got a race in Collingwood, January 2nd, 3rd. But I'll get a couple days off in there for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, nothing crazy on my end. We host Christmas dinner at our house. I'm enough of a meathead where literally part of my plans, I'm like, well, Christmas is a Wednesday. That's a leg day. Like, okay, I got to make sure I get my leg day training in before we have Christmas dinner. So yeah, pretty low key. I don't have a lot of family in the area, so it's really just my parents. Cool. And then, you know, back to much of the same. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be, so by the time this comes out, we will have already gone on our trip. But this week we're going to be going to Vienna, actually, which I'm really excited about. It's a place that my sister has been speaking highly about, and so many people have been speaking about it for years. So we're really excited. In part, my wife, she has like an addiction with Christmas markets.
I was going to say, are they still open?
Oh boy, I get it.
Yeah, hell yeah. Wait, am I missing something here? The Christmas
not
markets?
me.
No, I was just wondering if they were still open this time of the year. I guess we're getting pretty close. I'm also like, because I've got this training camp coming up, my dates are like weirdly skewed because I got to get everything done before we leave. And I'm coming
I
back so
understand.
close to Christmas that like it feels like Christmas is like tomorrow for me.
Mm.
That I'm like, oh yeah, why would they still be open? It's almost, oh no, it's only the 17th. Never mind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So short, and I can relate to that actually. But yeah, the Christmas markets are still very much open, and apparently they're unreal in Vienna. So that'll be really cool. Then we're coming back, and it's going to be a chill Christmas here. A little bit of skiing in Jan at some point, and but yeah, in the grand
Nordic
scheme of
or
things,
the fun skiing?
Downhill,
Nice.
fun skiing. Yeah. There's have you ever heard of like the Grindelwald region in Switzerland?
Mm-hmm.
From Harry Potter?
Well, actually, interesting. I'm pretty sure that that Grindelwald was named after that town. But there's a town not far from here called not far. You know, it's like a 3-hour drive called Grindelwald, and there's some really fantastic skiing there. And so we have some friends coming in from Canada who are fantastic skiers, and they were like, "That's where we want to go." So we're going to be going to check that out at some point in Jan.
Cool.
Other than that, like very much like you, Raya, it's going to be simple, getting back, some time off, and then getting right back into the swing of things with the projects. So cool.
Sweet.
Cool.
Awesome, gentlemen. Well, listen,
Happy
thank you so
holidays.
much for today. Yeah. Happy holidays, and I'll connect with you guys next week. Thank you so much for today. That was a lot of fun. I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, dude.
All right, later.
Cheers.